Hi, everybody. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I hope you're all excited to hear about entrepreneurial ecosystem building. Okay, I am Chelsea Linder. I'm the VP of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at TechPoint, which is a nonprofit based here in Indianapolis, and we focus on serving the tech ecosystem and economy here in Indiana, increasing the number of tech companies and tech jobs. And I am honored to be moderating this discussion today with some really fabulous peers who are building similar ecosystems across the world. So first up, we have Cynthia Crutchfield, who is the CEO of Innovate Alabama. Jamila Corbett, who is the engagement director at Established and is building entrepreneurial ecosystems from a national level. And then Sarah Mostovich, who is the head of innovation at Northguide and is building these ecosystems in Canada. We're looking forward to talking to you all today. So I wanted to get started by asking you all, just to kind of set some context, what is your ecosystem like, and what do you think are the signs that it is a thriving ecosystem? And Cynthia, I'll start with you.
Am I live? Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. So our ecosystem, it's not necessarily new, but I do think that we have been evolving over the last couple of years. So I think for us, just getting our feet wet and trying to really formulate what we want our ecosystem to look like. So my organization actually sits outside of the state government, which I think is a little bit unique. We purposely, our focus is really on technology innovation, and sitting outside of the government, it ensures that we have the flexibility to sort of not really get bogged down by the bureaucracy, but at the same time ensure that we don't go lunatic fringe and get totally crazy with it. So I say it's creation and innovation with some bounds. At the same time, we ensure that we have public-private participation. So we do have that mix of government, industry, and educational organizations and nonprofit. So I think for us, just we're at that infancy stage. But we have rolled out a lot of programs, I think, that will help us grow our ecosystem over the next few years.
Yeah, I think collaboration across all of those players you mentioned is one of the keys that we're definitely going to talk about today. Okay, Jamila, you want to go up next?
Yeah, so the key word here is thriving. And I like how you say we're going to dive deep. So what we believe at Established is we believe we're the connective tissue that turns partnerships into progress, because we believe that when ecosystem builders, support organizations, government, and capital providers work together, that's where the real magic happens. And sometimes that's difficult to do. So when you can bring all of those players together, and when we get this systems alignment right, that's how ecosystems not only grow, but flourish, scale, and create impact.
All right, Sarah, you're up.
So Northguide, we're a strategy consulting firm working to build strong innovation ecosystems all around the world. So we work largely in Canada, but also in jurisdictions including Barbados and Sweden, and looking at Africa right now as well. But I would say our home innovation ecosystem is really in Waterloo Region, Canada. And Waterloo is a really special place. It has a lot of the right building blocks for innovation. It has really strong academic institutions like the University of Waterloo, for example. It has a strong foundation and innovation history, especially being where BlackBerry was started and headquartered, and a huge number of tech companies that have really flourished and grown coming out of that, and other success, and also coming out of kind of the universities. And I think when we talk about a thriving ecosystem, what makes it really successful is when you bring together the various people across the ecosystem for shared purpose. And it's something that we did recently. We launched the Waterloo Region CEO Challenge Summit, where we brought together folks recognizing that there's huge challenges that Canada's dealing with right now. There's housing crises, there's trade negotiations going on, there's a lot of tension, a lot of change, and really brought together folks across industry, across academia, and across government to say, how can we come together to address these in different ways? So I think absolutely the connective tissue between organizations is critical.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so the first big topic we're going to dive deeper on is what frameworks are we using to develop our ecosystems, and then how are we measuring whether those frameworks are working? So for example, in our work at TechPoint, we have 3 pillars that we are focused on, which are innovation and entrepreneurship, talent, and community. And those pillars are how we define our strategy and measure what we're doing throughout our work. And I think that every ecosystem leader here on the stage has a similar type of framework. So I would love to hear more about that. Maybe we can start with Jamila this time.
Yeah, so what we do is we look at ecosystem building as collaboration, connectivity, capital, and community. So the community is what gives the ecosystem culture. It's the heartbeat of the ecosystem. And then capital is what injects the money to keep the ecosystem going. And then what we do is we liken ecosystem building or the framework to, does anyone in here bake? So we know baking is an art form. And so when we're building ecosystems, we think of it as what ingredients do we need to build a cake? What ingredients do we need to build this thing? And if you know anything about baking, it has to be very precise. So you may need 3 cups of sugar, 3 tablespoons of butter. I'm not a baker, so I'm not very good at baking. So the way we look at it is when we bring these stakeholders together, it's important to come up, like what Sarah said, you have to have a shared value or a shared purpose. So what are we building here? What are we baking here? Are we going to bake a pie? Are we going to bake a cake? And then you have to bring all the stakeholders to the table. You don't want a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but you do need their input for the recipe. So the recipe is, okay, we're going to build a cake, but here are the ingredients that our ecosystem needs to make this cake happen. And so when you bring those people together and they contribute to very early on in the decision-making process, that's how you build trust, and because you're bringing in the community. And so when you align on that, then we have to figure out what is the measure of success. So if we're building a cake and the cake is supposed to have raspberry cream filling, but it turns out to be vanilla, okay, well, we got that wrong. So we have to go back and figure out the recipe to make this happen. And so we have to also measure it. What are our metrics of success? So creating a shared language to figure out how do we measure impact, and it's very difficult to do when you have multiple stakeholders at the table. So we have to figure out what is the value proposition for each stakeholder. And then once that cake comes out, one other thing, we need a head baker. So you need the person that's actually going to bake the cake. Yes, we have all of these people contributing to the recipe, but you don't want a lot of cooks in the kitchen. You don't want everyone baking that cake. So when you have that head, that connector, it could be established, it could be Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, it could be Indiana Economic Development Corporation. It's the person that convenes the stakeholders together and keeps everybody on track. We maybe have shared convenings, meetings, figuring out how to mobilize everyone in the ecosystem. And then finally, the cake comes out and we measure the impact. We measure, okay, does this taste good? Should we bake more cakes? Or do we need to change the recipe? And so that's how we look at ecosystem building. That's how I liken ecosystem building to baking a cake, figuring out what we're gonna do, how we're gonna bake it. Is it delicious? Do we need to bake more, or do we need to start from scratch and come up with an entirely new recipe?
That's awesome. Thank you. I want to go back to that culture building piece and placemaking because I think, Cynthia, you and Innovate Alabama have a really unique perspective there. So I would love to dig in more.
Sure. So our framework is a little bit different, but I would say that, at least in our minds, it's uniquely Alabama. We also have 3 pillars. much like Indiana. I guess 3's the lucky number today. So our focus has really been access to resources. For us, that does include capital, but it also includes just helping our entrepreneurs and innovators understand our ecosystem overall. So we've created an asset map that allows them to understand what's in the north, what's in the south, what's in the middle of the state, what resources can you use when they relocate to those areas. So making sure that we have a variety of programs for them, be that venture capital, be that debt programs, non-dilutive grants, all of the things that you would need from an entrepreneurship perspective. The next item for us is really talent attraction and retention. Talent development is really key for us. You can't build a company without the right talent. So we have some very focused market sectors that we're focused on within the state of Alabama, including advanced manufacturing. We've got a lot of automotive manufacturers in the state of Alabama. We also have a lot of bioscience, biotech. So we focus on those market sectors and make sure that we are developing talent around those so that our founders have the resources that we need. We also partner with not only our universities, but our K through 12 organizations as well. Finally, I think the one that you talked about, placemaking, outdoor recreation is our third pillar, believe it or not. And we really use that as a talent attraction tool and retaining tool. So placemaking for us is very important. We've established a campaign around really focusing on quality of life in the state of Alabama so that when our founders come, they understand that they have a holistic ecosystem. They don't just work hard, but we create ways for them to play hard and just understand holistically what's available in the state of Alabama.
Okay, and Sarah, I would love to hear about the framework that you all are using with your work across all of your ecosystems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually think, Jamila, we use a very similar framework to you folks. So I don't know that I need to kind of say it all over again. We have slightly different language. We talk about people, partnerships, programs, and policy typically, with capital falling typically under the programs lens there. But I want to echo what you're saying about that head baker concept and the importance of connectivity between all of those pieces. Because I think the number one most important thing when you're building an ecosystem is having that shared vision for what you're all developing together. And sometimes that shared vision can initially come from the head baker, but it's absolutely critical that you have community buy-in and that the community has also contributed towards the vision so that you ultimately feel like when it's something the community is building together, that they're the ones who really asked for it and participated in its creation. And when we talk about that head baker role, I think there's certainly the coordinating and convening aspect of it. So really bringing folks together regularly, providing the forum and the platform for these conversations, but then also providing the accountability and making sure that we're regularly, coming back together, measuring things, as you said, making sure that, folks understand their role in enabling the vision that we're looking to build and are responsible or know what they're responsible for driving forward and are accountable for those outcomes.
Thank you. So I want to go a level deeper now and talk about how are we putting this into practice by talking about some of our programs as examples. And I really liked what you were saying about collecting that stakeholder information, but then having that head baker. I think an example of that here in Indiana is with our Indiana Founders Network, which we just launched last year in 2024. And the reason TechPoint launched the Founders Network was because we were hearing from the founders that they felt alone and they felt like they were the only one going through the things that they were going through. And us having the privilege of being at that 60,000 foot view, we know that they're not alone and that every single founder is going through these similar things. So we started the Founders Network, and I think that having that industry-led perspective as far as coming together and designing the recipe is really powerful. But then after that, being able to see that we kind of put ourselves in the startup mindset and say we have product market fit now. We see that in 1 year we've gotten 150 founders in Indiana involved, and we've been able to open 3 chapters of the network with even more demand for more chapters across the state. I think that's a really good example example that we have from our ecosystem of how this framework is actually playing out. And I would love to give you all an opportunity to share some of your successful programs as well. Sarah, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. So I think one of the things that I was most proud of, especially in Waterloo Region, is over the course of the pandemic, the region's always talked about being highly collaborative and cross-functional, as I mentioned before, even with our CEO Challenge Summit most recently. But it can be hard, especially to look outside of the walls of the type of organization and sector they're used to being part of. So over the pandemic, I think because everything was moving so quickly and no one knew quite what was going on, it really broke down some of those silos. And we saw folks from academia, we saw innovators coming together, we saw healthcare professionals and leaders coming together, as well as government, to start collaborating, to just say, how do we get people back to work? How do we get people back into the community? How do we make sure that we have safe health outcomes for our community? Even thinking about things like field hospitals, if it ever came to that. So I think it was really an opportunity for us to practice what we preach when it came to all coming together and working on something. And we've actually seen a huge explosion of health tech companies being built in the region now based on that. I think once you break down some of those silos, then folks start coming together and having the conversations that maybe they weren't having before. And we're really starting to see positive outcomes from that.
Thank you. Jamila, do you want to share some of your programs?
Yeah, so we work with governments to mobilize ecosystems. And one of the things that we've been able to do is we helped create the SBA Innovation Ecosystem Network Call. Has anyone ever participated in that or been a part of that? Okay, a couple people in the room. So what we did was we recognized that ecosystem builders across the nation need to collaborate. Again, like you said, Chelsea, they need to know that, hey, we're in this together. Yes, we may have provided you funding under the SBA Federal and State Technology Partnership Program or the Growth Accelerated Fund Competition, or maybe you receive funds being a regional innovation cluster, all programs within OII that Established works with under the Small Business Administration. But we recognize the need to bring all of these stakeholders together to, again, say, hey, we're in this with you. And so what we did was we created the framework to facilitate those conversations, to facilitate those connections, and also to foster learning and capacity building. So we've actually recently had Cynthia in Innovate Alabama on there to discuss, what are you building in your ecosystem? What are your frameworks? What are your lessons learned? And oftentimes what we see is having these conversations opens the doors, number one, for more collaboration and for cross-sector collaboration as well. So we're really proud of that, number one. We were able to build the framework for SBA, and now I used to be the face of it, but now SBA runs it because we were able to build the framework at Established to keep the conversations going. Another initiative that we worked on directly with our SBA client is the Growth Accelerated Fund Competition, which is basically providing funding for ESOs, the people who have boots on the ground, to help those innovators commercialize their technologies. And I've reviewed tons and tons of applications in the past. And from what I can tell, from what I see, the ecosystems that were most successful when we conducted interviews specifically for that phase 2 funding, which offered $150,000 to execute their vision, the ecosystems that were top tier, the ESOs that stood at the top, they were, number one, able to successfully convene their stakeholders. They had a budget, so they knew how they were going to spend the money, and they had community buy-in. And they also were able to, in some cases, had that matching fund support, those matching dollars. So they knew they had this vision, and they just needed a little bit of capital to put them over the top or to mobilize their ecosystem. And so I think it's important to have and what we do well is have a strategy for bringing all of those stakeholders together, networking, and also creating that common shared language and creating those systems in place where ecosystem builders can continue the conversations and build ecosystems at scale.
Thank you, Jamila. Cynthia?
Okay, so in Alabama, Innovate Alabama is that convener. Our role, again, sitting outside of the state, we are able to sort of keep an independent view to make sure that we bring all of the relevant parties together. There's so many successes. It's hard to just choose one, but I'll do my best. I think for me, looking at the state of Alabama, we have 67 counties across the state. Most of those are rural spaces. And so what we've tried to do is make sure that we have that common view of what we want our ecosystem to look like. So if you're in an urban space, innovation technology looks very different versus that of a rural space. So what we try to do in all of our programs, and I'm settling on this one because I think it cross-cuts all of our programs, but we try to make sure that like communities are competing with each other, so our urbans do not compete with our rural spaces, so that they have fair opportunity to get those dollars into their communities. Innovation does not look the same. For, say, Birmingham, that has the University of Alabama, Birmingham, they have one of the largest research industries located on campus. So they're getting a lot of outside dollars. Certainly, innovation for them looks very different from some of our rural spaces where a smart city looks really exciting, or creating a tech hub looks really exciting. So for us, our network designation program is the program that I would say has given us the most leverage across the state. That program has been around for just about a year. We have over 168 members, and that includes universities, nonprofits, it includes communities. So communities are able to come in and request those dollars to do projects that they would like to see done within their own communities. Just recently in Marion, Alabama, I think they have about 700 people in that rural space. They created, with one of our grants, a tech hub for their citizens in their community. Now, again, for the guys in Huntsville, Birmingham, Mobile, Montgomery, that's not a huge deal, but for that community, that's a game changer. Now, not only their adult workers are able to retrain and get into tech industries, but their students actually start to see exposure to technology that they weren't getting before, and jobs that they can actually remain in their community and also participate in that technology focus. So that's one of our really success stories I love the network. It's actually my favorite program, and we've given out over $30 million in just a year of that program. So it really is making a difference for the state of Alabama.
Yeah, that's awesome. Congratulations. Okay, so one of the things that I think we all talked about is how important stakeholder collaboration and cross-sector collaboration is. And as you mentioned, Jamila, it's super hard too. So I want to dig into that one next and kind of talk about how are we doing it successfully, and what does that look like? For example, in Indiana with Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, we host regular roundtables where we bring together all of our stakeholders in different sectors. So for example, we recently had a higher ed roundtable where we had all of our higher ed institutions together to talk about how do we support entrepreneurship and specifically the commercialization of their IP. And we got some really great feedback out of that that's helping us design our strategic plan and how we're going to address that moving forward. I think that was an example of making sure that all the voices are heard. The recipe is building together. And I would love to hear other examples. I don't know who wants to go first for this one. Okay, I'm going to pick Cynthia.
I was going to say I'll go first. So I think for us, just looking at our approach is really very research-based. So up front, we went across the state and we heard from entrepreneurs, from ecosystem builders, from educators, communities, and we really built our plan around that. So what we did was really understand what the barriers and opportunities were. That really gave us a really good blueprint for what we were going to build. I think it was important for us to get buy-in from the legislative members up front. because they are the funders for a lot of our work. And so getting them to buy in on that vision of where we wanted to go was really, really important. And then once we had that buy-in, we took it to that next level for our board. If you look at our board of directors, it really does include the highest legislative members. It includes CEOs of industries. It includes university professors. So we get that view across the board. So we're really working hard to make sure that we're trying to look at it from all aspects and make sure that everyone gets that voice and everyone gets to participate.
Jamila, you want to jump in next?
Yeah, can you repeat the question?
How are we successfully doing stakeholder and cross-sector collaboration?
Yeah, I think I touched on it a little bit before where I mentioned the SBA Innovation Ecosystem Network call. That's how we're doing it for one of our clients. But specifically for us at Establish, we created Establish Network, and we host a monthly innovation circle where we're doing just that. We're getting all of our stakeholders together, understanding their feedback, what's working, what's not, how can we best serve you? And so, again, it's important to bring those people to the table, because when you're building an ecosystem, it's important that every part of the ecosystem feels seen, supported, and activated. So when we build ecosystems, whether for our clients or for ourselves, we convene the stakeholders, we understand what's going on, we understand the problems, and we build programs and activities around those challenges. So that's number one. Number two, another example, I'm going to use the same SBA example, Growth Accelerator Fund Competition. In previous cycles of the competition, we would bring the awardees together, the cohorts together, so we could understand their challenges, understand what we needed to do better, and then from that feedback, we would iterate the program. So one of the some feedback that we received previously is, hey, we're giving you all these metrics. It's just the data workbook, but we can't really, it doesn't really show impact because it's just numbers. So we need a better way to tell the story of our ecosystem. That was one of the challenges that we heard across the board from the previous GAFC winners. So what do? We said, okay, how about this year, you can give us the workbook, but also submit a narrative along with your workbook so that you can tell a better story, so we can understand what the data is saying. Because it's important. The government loves data. Data tells us what's happening, but story tells us why it matters. So we believe at Establish we believe in combining both to, number one, mobilize impact, and also understand the challenges and how we could do things better.
Sarah?
So I think, as we said before, when you're convening folks together, the most important thing is that you have a united vision that you're all working towards. And often when we do that, we use an artifact called an ecosystem map. So we understand, based on the vision that we're looking to build, who are all of the players that are in that space right now, and what are their respective roles. I think what the number one issue we run into when it comes to collaboration is folks don't want other organizations or other ecosystem players to be taking their lunch, especially when we're talking about a scarcity of resources. Folks don't want to have anything taken away. So how can we get all of the activities that different organizations are doing out in the open so that we can look at that ecosystem map to understand where are the gaps in the community, and also in some cases, where are there redundancies? And get that front and center and identify places where, especially if we're talking about a scarcity of resources, where there's duplication, we might be able to partner to do the same amount of value when it comes to having fewer resources. And also, can we identify areas where we're working on similar things but in very different ways and have different skill sets, so can each lean into our unique value propositions there. Especially when you're talking about truly cross-sectoral work, I think it's also important to understand the different skill sets and values that are at the table. So certainly when we're coming to academic institutions, it's often from the research lens, and it's often from the skill and talent development lens. When you're talking about ESOs, it's a lot more around community engagement and coaching entrepreneurs. When it comes to businesses, it's more about the economic output that they're producing, but then also kind of the coaching and mentorship that they can provide to one another. So how do you understand within the players that you have at the table where their superpowers are and how you can best lean into that to ultimately achieve the vision that we're all moving towards?
Thank you. Okay, I want to dig in a little bit with the legislators and policymakers, since this is an area that we all need to collaborate with, and especially in times of change, it can be more one of the more challenging aspects. So how are we successfully partnering with legislators and policymakers to influence change in our ecosystems? Cynthia, maybe you can go first as well for this.
Sure, absolutely. So our legislative members, again, have been involved with our process from the beginning. Again, we think it's important to get their buy-in. They are actually driving a lot of the activity in the state of Alabama. Rare these days, but across the aisle, they all actually agree that innovation, technology, and supporting entrepreneurs is really important for the state of Alabama. So I think that as our foundation actually helps us quite a bit. I talked about our board, which does have legislative members on it. And I think that really just gives us that voice in the legislative body so that we're always front of mind to them in terms of what we're doing. Alabama does have this law that's basically Open Meetings Act, which means that anybody, anywhere in the state of Alabama can actually sit on our board meetings and listen to the things that we're doing. I think that allows not just that participation from the legislative members, but also the citizens at large, giving them the opportunity to tune in or out, depending on what's important to their community. So we do have our annual convening where we bring the legislative members together. We provide them an overall understanding of our programs and the outcomes. We definitely want to make sure that they are government, so they definitely need those stats. And so we make sure that we quantify the number of jobs and all the things that they need. But again, like you said before, storytelling is really important. So to be most effective, I think across all sectors, just making sure that everybody hears those stories and that they understand, if I'm a funder, that I'm seeing the benefit of what's coming out of those dollars that I'm investing. And so trying to make that value prop visible to each stakeholder is really where we focus.
Yeah, I agree. I think in Indiana, we've similarly been lucky to have our policymakers on board with supporting entrepreneurship and business. And that, I think, is largely what has helped us become a leader in our ecosystem. So definitely agree there. Jamila, what perspective do you have to share here?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a 30,000-foot overview perspective and talk about it from the federal level since we work with federal clients. And like Cynthia mentioned, it's important to get the buy-in from the policymakers. So what we do is we convene them. We actually produced the SBA Innovation Ecosystem Summit, where we brought together government folks, private capital, people, different stakeholders, and we were able to showcase, okay, this is why ecosystem building is important. These are the communities that are being affected, and this is why you should keep funding this work. We also we hosted America's Seed Fund Week, which we were able to bring together some of the federal partners that make up the SBIR STTR program. And again, it's the same thing because you want legislative buy-in. So we were able to bring those people together and say, okay, these are the programs that are offered by the SBIR STTR program. This is why it matters, and this is why it needs to continue getting congressional funding, and again, allowing the ecosystem to tell their story. I'm gonna harp on. This is the hill I will die on. Stories matter when paired with data, because again, the story creates the context for the data. So it's important to, like Cynthia said, bring those legislative people in and create that buy-in. We also we hosted the Startup Expo. This was a couple years ago, where we were able to bring in companies that were funded by the SBIR STTR program and showcase them in front of the administration at the time, saying, okay, this is why the SBIR STTR program matters. This is where your funding went, and this is the impact these startups are having in their ecosystem. So again, story matters, data matters, and you got to pair the two in order to be successful.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to skip down to the next question just in the interest of time. I want to make sure we talk about measuring and storytelling because it's a super important part. So Sarah, maybe we'll start with you. I want to talk about how are we measuring the impact of our work? What ways have we found to be successful? And any other tips you might have to share?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I absolutely agree, Jamila, that it's about stories combined with stats that make the most compelling, arguments for why this is important work that you should continue funding. I think it's also important to think about the time horizons, especially when you're thinking about statistics and metrics, because often, especially when it comes to ecosystem building work, the ultimate ROI that you're looking for in terms of company creation, in terms of GDP growth and things like that, is a long time away from when you're first starting these initiatives. So it's important to look at things like, usage and market traction for different initiatives to measure whether people are leaning in on the work that you're doing and if it seems likely that you're going to get those longer term outcomes down the line. So figuring out what you can measure in the short term, medium term, and long term, and also track whether your early indicators were actually the right predictors of the ultimate output the further along you go.
Yeah, I think having a very strong theory of change and one that's transparently shared with the community is a great way to measure those near-term and long-term impacts of your work and make sure that you're measuring the right things along the way, for sure. Jamila, what would you add there?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think you all have said it all. I have nothing else to add.
Awesome. Okay, so let's talk about storytelling. I would love to hear examples of successful storytelling and the ways that you think the community is hearing the stories that you're telling. One of the things that I think we do in Indiana that's really unique and is a super fun storytelling mechanism is TechPoint hosts an annual event called the Mira Awards. We call it the Oscars of Tech in Indiana, and it's all about celebrating the stories of all the amazing innovation that's going on here through like a red carpet, black tie event with several hundred, 2,000 people attending and being involved in that process. So I think it's like a super fun and unique way to celebrate and tell those stories, and something that we have found to be really powerful across our ecosystem. Cynthia, what examples could you share there?
So some of our examples include, we also have pitch competitions. We do our celebrations at the end of the year, but I think the most effective thing is putting our founders before our legislative members, our investors, so that they hear firsthand the impact of the dollars and what difference that's making across the communities. So for us, anytime we can present a founder, whether it's a neurologist that has a new tool that they've designed that they're going to manufacture in the state of Alabama, that's really exciting when legislators hear that there's a new potential born here, grown here in the state of Alabama, and now it's going to be manufactured here. So we try to really lean into those stories. But I also think that for us, one of our priorities was really getting, if you know anything about Alabama, we tend to like to invest in real estate. We don't like to invest in high-risk companies. And so trying to change that culture for the state of Alabama has been really difficult. So with one of the federally funded programs, our SSBCI, we've been able to attract investments from out-of-state investors that we would not normally do, and that's with a matching program. And it has really carried the water, I think, in terms of just changing the temperature of how venture works in the state. More importantly, getting those investors with that capital in the state to get off the sidelines and invest in Alabama companies.
Awesome. Okay, Sarah, I'll go to you next.
So I think it's super important to do storytelling effectively within your ecosystem, but I also think it's critical to do storytelling across ecosystems from one to the other. So my company, Northguide, started convening, this will be our second year now in October, a global ecosystem summit, where we bring together ecosystem builders from across the world to share what's working well in their jurisdictions and try to learn from one another, and also try to identify opportunities to work together on shared initiatives and really build bridges between ecosystems. And I think that's so important because, one, it gets your ecosystem better and bigger visibility on the global stage, but it also helps you identify, the fact that different ecosystems often share really similar challenges. So getting that outside thinking is extremely valuable when it comes to solving your own problems as well.
That was a perfect setup because I think Jamila has an example of an Indiana company that had some successful storytelling with SBA as well, Pierce Aerospace.
Yeah, Pierce Aerospace right here in Indiana, and you all had a piece of that. So Pierce Aerospace is a great success story that came out of the Indiana ecosystem because it's an example of when network partners collaborate and work together, it accelerates impact. And with Pierce Aerospace, they received the SBIR. Okay, so all the programs that I'm going to name are out of SBA, Office of Investment and Innovation, and this is the federal client that we work with. So the Pierce Aerospace received an SBIR Phase 1 from AFWorks, and then from there, they were able to kind of filter through the ecosystem, the innovation ecosystem here in Indiana, and worked with ecosystem partners that have won a Growth Accelerator Fund competition, which is TechPoint, have also worked an organization that's won a RIC. They've worked with Indiana Economic Development Corporation. And because of all the effort of the ecosystem, they were able to secure a $10 million Phase 3 from AFWorks. And again, this highlights the importance of when network partners work together, and it just kind of accelerates that impact. So Pierce Aerospace is a good one. And this is when you, again, combining data and storytelling. So the way we contributed to this report, the success story, is that SBA had the numbers, because of course, they love numbers, it's government. So SBA had the data. They gave us the data. And then we put together the narrative established. We put together the narrative saying, what is this data telling us? Why is it important? And how can we communicate this so that we can show the administration why these programs need to continue to exist? And it's really important, especially now in the climate that we're in, where we're trying to align programs to administrative priorities. It's really important to communicate that impact with the data. And we were able to do that by getting the data and then creating a narrative that tells the impact.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, we just have a few minutes left. So with our last time, I wanted to ask everyone to share tips for somebody who may be just getting started or doesn't have a very established ecosystem where they are. Where do you start? What's first? Sarah?
So I think often when folks are building innovation ecosystems, they look at Silicon Valley and say, how could we do that? I'm telling you, don't do that. What's most important is understanding what makes your ecosystem unique. Even if you're just starting out, what makes your community different? What do you have as local assets that you can turn into local unique value propositions? So really trying to spend some time with your community to understand what makes you different. Why do people live there? Why do people love working there? And how do you turn that into a competitive advantage?
Jamila?
One last piece of advice. I think, to speak to your point, I think we shouldn't start with asking ourselves, what do we need to build? Because we look at other ecosystems and we're like, I want to bring that here. And the last thing you want to do is inject what you think this ecosystem needs without understanding the needs, the culture, and deeply understanding the community. So instead, I would offer this thought of asking, who do I need to listen to? Who are the ecosystem players? Who are the boots on the ground in this ecosystem that I need to listen to so that I can create the impact? And so when you're able to have vision and voice and those things meet, you can build something really impactful.
Just like we tell startups, right? Talk to your customers first. Cynthia, what would you add?
Yeah, mine is very similar. I'm going to say don't mimic anyone. Be uniquely who you are. That's working for us in Alabama. We are heavily agriculture focused. That's our landscape. And so we're leaning into that. Technology hubs, we're leaning into those things. And I think getting everybody at the table to have conversations about it. So I think just figuring out what you have to build on is really the first question. and upfront try to figure out what are our expected outcomes. Like starting an ecosystem is fine, but what is it that you're looking to get out of it? Is it retention of talent? Is it growing corporations? Is it attracting corporations? I think you have to be unified in that purpose in terms of what you're trying to get out of building your ecosystem.
Yeah, and I would definitely add to that. I think when you're first starting out, again, similar to what I coach startups all the time, focus is really important. And when you go out and you do that listening and you talk to your stakeholders, they're going to tell you a list of many problems that need to be solved. And so it can be really challenging to prioritize and stay focused and address one or two of those things within your control. So I think, just retaining that laser focus, continuing to listen to your stakeholders, and work with others who may be able to solve some of those additional problems. Okay, that's all we have for today. Thank you all for joining us.